In 2006, we lost Ronnie Sox of the famous Sox and Martin racing team. It was a shock to the Mopar world, and we all realized at that moment that we were not going to have our heroes around forever. Soon wrote an editorial in Mopar Collector's Guide referencing how we needed to do a Hall of Fame for the Mopar heroes that we grew up with, to preserve Mopar history for the future generations. As the years went by, I ran into a good friend of mine, Jim Kramer, at a show, and he asked me when I was going to do a Mopar Hall of Fame. I must have looked at him with a yeah right look in my eyes. He proceeded to say, "If you don't do it, no one else will." In my heart of hearts, I knew he was right, so in 2011 I began lining up sponsors and critical people to help me pull something together that the entire Mopar community could be proud of. What we ended up with was a number of Hall of Fame induction dinners that were held Saturday night of each Chrysler's at Carlisle event from 2012 until 2018. The Mopar Hall of Fame will go forward each preceding year in the pages of Mopar Collector's Guide magazine. This is one of those recordings made on one of those incredible nights at the Mopar Hall of Fame at Chrysler's at Carlisle. One of the most dominant dirt track, short track guys in the day was Ernie Derr. And if you look at his win record, it's unbelievable. So I'd like to welcome his son, Jeff, to come up and talk about his dad.
Hello, baby. Yeah, this is the Big Bopper speaking.
It's an honor to be here. Actually, I'm Ernie's grandson. I am the son of his only daughter. He had 5 sons, and it's an honor to be here. I'm thankful that they chose me to come out from Iowa to speak on my grandfather's behalf. I want to get some thank yous out of the way. First is one, the Mopar Hall of Fame for the great weekend and hospitality. And my grandfather, if he was here with us today, he would consider this a great honor. I would like to thank all the inductees and their families on this honor. Enjoy this weekend and time. But most of all, I'd like to thank my family and my grandmother. My grandmother is 91 years old. She is a 3-time cancer survivor, just survived her 3rd round at age 89. And the reason why I'm wearing a tie tonight is she says, "Now you're going to wear a sport coat." "Yeah, I'm going to wear a sport coat." "Tie?" "No." "Yeah, you need to wear a tie." So I've got tie on. I picked red because Ernie was famous for running those red and white Dodge Chargers in the late 1960s, early 1970s. I'd also like to thank the Chrysler Corporation. They put Ernie in some top-notch cars for a long time. Ray Nichols Engineering in Indiana, they had Ernie building Ernie's cars for him. He got 1 car a year from Dodge. And last of all, I'd like to thank STP. They were a long sponsor of him. Andy Granatelli was a big supporter of Ernie. And there will be a picture behind me of Andy Granatelli with Ernie at an awards banquet. A little bit about Ernie's career. He was a 12-time IMCA National Stock Car Champion. His specialty was dirt tracks, especially the half-mile and mile dirt tracks of the Midwest, all the way from St. Paul, Minnesota to Shreveport, Louisiana. His career started in 1950. He had gone the year before, 1949, and watched his brother-in-law, Don White, race, also from Keokuk. And he said, "This looks like a good way I can make a living." Now, Ernie only had an 8th grade education. He was a child of the Depression, so his dad made him quit school when he was in the 8th grade. So he was just looking for a way to support his family. And I didn't know this till I was getting ready to put the presentation. The first 2 pictures of this presentation, you saw a picture of Ernie and Don when they were real young. I've looked at that picture hundreds of times. I never realized they had Dodge cars, because in the 50s they didn't run Dodge except for 1 year, 1956. And unfortunately, his career with Dodge didn't get off to a good start. That's the only year Ernie did not win a race from 1971 to 1975. But he had the smarts to come back to Mopar products in Chrysler Corporation in 1964. In 1964, the first car he ran was a 1963 Dodge at the ARCA race in Daytona. Ernie finished second in that race. He told me many times after that, he says, "Jeffrey, I should have won that race. I messed up the last pit stop." So even 30 years later, he was still remembers a loss more than all the wins that he had. And then after the race at Daytona, he ran Plymouth. Now, it took Ernie a little bit of time to get adjusted to the Plymouth and get it dialed in. Now, he still won 15 races that year, but he finished third in the points. He finished to a fellow Keokuk driver, Dick Hutcherson, and then Ramo Stott, fellow Hall of Famer, was second. 1965, Ernie made the decision to switch the Dodge, and the rest is history. He had the support of his good friend Ronnie Householder, who was top racing executive at Chrysler, in charge of aerodynamics and the success of Dodge race cars. In a 1984 Des Moines Register article, one of the top driver mechanic, he called Ernie one of the top driver mechanic combination of his lifetime. Ernie won the S&K IMCA Mechanic of the Year 3 times. 1965 started a 7-year run of IMCA championships. In that time period, Ernie ran in 235 IMCA races. He won 145 of those races for a winning percentage of 62%. Over that same time period, he ran second 45 more times and third another 16 times. So during those years, he ran in the top 3 88% of those races. The victory that he cherished the most of that time period was the 1967 Iowa 300. Now, Dick Hutcherson, when he won 2 championships in a row, beating Ernie in 63 and 64, he went to NASCAR. And Dick drove Fords. The promoters at Des Moines, Iowa, at the State Fairgrounds, decided they wanted to bring Dick back in to run against Ernie Derr and Ramo Stott, who were driving Mopar products. It's a great gate. My grandfather was motivated. He thought the world of Dick, but he wanted to win that race in the worst way. He saved his 1967 Dodge Charger for that race. He ran his old car the year before for the previous IMCA races, which was a 66 Coronet. Dick came in, got the pole. Ernie started on the outside, and I would imagine Ramo started third or fourth. Ernie ended up winning that race. Many years later, we were at a family dinner, and one of his sons mentioned the 1967 Iowa 300, and his smile was from ear to ear. And there's a picture of that. Dick's in the number 29 car that will be playing behind me, and Grandpa was in the 67 Charger. He thought the world of Dick. He had a lot of respect for Dick because Dick had gone south and made it in NASCAR, which at that time was unusual for somebody from the north to go into NASCAR country and be successful. Dick often was said in a lot of newspaper articles that I have that if you wanted to beat Ernie Derr, you had better bring your lunch because it was going to be an all-day affair. He would also say if they wheeled Ernie Derr to the car in a wheelchair and he could somehow get in the car, he was still going to be the man to beat that day. That's the kind of respect that Dick had for Ernie. 1969 was, in my opinion, Ernie's best career. He had 2 other years where he won over 30 races. But 1969, according to the IMCA handbook, he raced in 29 races. He won 25 of them for a winning percentage of 86%. That included winning the last 12 races of that year in IMCA. He won the first 3 races of the 1970 season for 15 in a row. That season also included 2 other streaks of 4 wins in a row and 7 wins in a row. One thing I want to clarify that I meant to do earlier, a lot of Ernie's stats, sometimes on the internet you will see different numbers, and that is because IMCA had a fire in their record building in the 1950s. So many of his records are still being updated and everything, so different numbers. So I may say a different number than what's in your program, and that's why. Just to kind of give you an overview of his wins in Mopar products, he won 172 races driving Mopar products, and 157 of those came in Dodges. He won races in 18 states. So he raced all over the place. He won a race in Canada. He had the most success at the Louisiana State Fairgrounds in Shreveport, Louisiana. He won there 36 times, another 27 times at the Iowa State Fairgrounds. His wins included, from what I've been able to total up, 339 IMCA wins. In a total, he won 358 races, 11 of those in ARCA, and I think it was in like 36 starts. He had 3 victories in USAC, and he won another 5 races in unsanctioned races. He won 10 or more races in 17 seasons. Now, kind of preparing for this, I had to think about, I have to understand, Ernie retired when I was 6 years old, so I didn't really get to see that side of my grandfather. I kind of briefly remember it, and one of the reasons I came up with was his determination. He is the most determined man I have ever met in my life, and he hated losing. An example of this, a story I have, is from a race in the mid-1960s at Shreveport, Louisiana. His motor had blown that day. He had a second car in the race, driven by a man by the name of Lewis Taylor. Louis falls a lap behind. So Ernie writes on the pit board, "It's a pit." He asks Louis, "What's wrong with the car?" Louis says, "Ernie, the car has no brakes." Now I'm cleaning up how my grandfather told him to get out of the car, but he told him to immediately get out of the car. He grabbed his helmet, got in the car. He falls another lap behind. And the last thing Louis Taylor says to my grandpa is, "Ernie, the car has no brakes." And Ernie just looked at him and said, "I don't need any brakes," and mashed the gas pedal and took off. He ended up making up his 2 laps, winning the race, beating fellow Hall of Famer Ramo Stott. That was his determination. Even though it was his second car, he was not going to have somebody else drive one of his cars that he prepared and not drive it to its most capability. And it determines his grit to win. Another reason, I think, for Ernie's success was his focus. If you talk to his fellow competitors, they would tell you lap after lap after lap he could hit his marks and not make very many mistakes on the racetrack. He also was focused in the garage. He would often work from 7 a.m. in the morning till 10 o'clock at night on his race car, and if it meant pulling an overnighter to get his car ready for the race, that's what he did. A lot of times he pulled in late to racetracks, and the other competitors would be, "Oh, Derr's not here, and we might have a chance to win maybe if he's not here." And then all of a sudden, here come that hauler in with the red and white Dodge Charger on the back of it, and their heads would just kind of sink down, because most likely he was still working on his car, and he'd get there at the end. He kept accurate records. He was one of the first ones to start keeping a notebook of all the tracks and his different setups and all the things he did year after year after year. He did a lot of things for mechanical. He worked Chrysler, went to Detroit and helped them with the Hemi engine and different things. I don't know much of the details on that, but I know he worked with Ronnie Householder on that. In the early 1970s, Ernie decided to not run IMCA anymore, and he went to USAC, and he was just going to run a limited dirt schedule. Now, we've kind of heard the old phrase, you don't want to poke the bear or whatever it is. My grandfather was a very humble person. He didn't like to talk about himself. He just did his job. But don't make him mad. He went to a USAC race at Champaign, and there was a Goodyear tire rep. Hopefully there's no Goodyear tire people here tonight. that was rather upset with Ernie because he wasn't running new Goodyear tires. He was running used Goodyear tires that he had tricked up. And so the Goodyear tire guy just kept pursuing it. So just as the race is about to start, my Uncle Mike is getting ready to seatbelt his dad in the car. And my grandpa sees the Goodyear tire guy. And he goes over, and he said, Mike, I'll be back in a second. He goes over to the guy, and Dean Hale, who was another crew member of my grandpa's, walked over with him. And all my Uncle Mike could see was my grandpa pointing at the Goodyear guy and pointing towards turn 3. Now, I think my grandfather had qualified either 4th or 5th in the race. It was a 100-lap race. He comes back, says nothing to Mike, gets in the car, green flag drops, my grandpa drops that car to the inside, and he just takes off. And by the time he gets to turn 3, he's in the lead. And if you'd ever watched Ernie Derr race, that was totally uncharacteristic of him because he would take his time and come up through the field and preserve his equipment. And my Uncle Mike is just shocked. He's never seen his dad drive this way. And he says to Dean Hale, what is he doing? What did he say to that man? And Dean Hale says, Ernie told the guy to put his eyes on turn 3 because by the time I get to turn 3 on the first lap, I'm going to pass all your guys that are running those new Goodyear tires. Now, unfortunately, Ernie blew the motor at lap 50. But on a note that I found out later on, he had found water in the oil before the race and didn't have time to change the motor out. So I don't know if he was just originally going to try to preserve the engine and run 100 laps, and then the guy just made him mad and he wanted to kind of prove a point to him. But he talked about that race many years later with me, saying that was probably the best car he ever had for one night in a race and had it hooked up. He lapped Don White and he lapped Ramo Stott within, I think, the first 20 laps of the race to give you an indication of how dominant that car was on dirt. And to kind of finish up here is I want to pay respect and homage to the 4 drivers from Keokuk, Iowa. I had the good fortune of being raised in a small little Mississippi River town of 15,000 people that in the 1950s and 1960s produced some of the best stock car drivers in the country. Don White started it in 1949. My grandpa followed. Dick Hutcherson and Ramo Stott followed in the late 1950s. Those 4 men combined won 22 IMCA, USAC, or ARCA championships, just to give you an indication from a little small town. Ernie had great respect for all 3 drivers, and each driver's family will feel that their driver is the best. I know my opinion is biased, but I feel Ernie was the best of the 4 from that town. And I say that with respect to the other 3 drivers. And the reason why I say Ernie was the best was Don White had to beat Ernie in IMCA in the 1950s. He went on to win 2 USAC championships and win 53 races when USAC had a stock car division. He is a member of the USAC Hall of Fame. Number 2 on that list is A.J. Foyt, just to give you an idea of the people that he was racing against. Dick Hutcherson moved on to NASCAR, and he won 13 races in 3 years, then was crew chief for 2 of David Pearson's championships. There's one thing I do want to go back to Don White that I forgot to say. Don White is my great uncle. I have 2 heroes in my life, Ernie Derr and Don White. I was very fortunate to grow up around those 2 men. Those 2 competed with each other like you cannot believe. Ernie Derr never went in Don White's garage. Don White never went in Ernie Derr's garage. Now, they would loan each other parts if they needed it, but somebody else had to go pick them up, and if they went in the garage, they were searched for measuring devices. That's how competitive they were. But just to give you an idea of the respect my grandfather had for Don White, when my grandpa was well in his 80s, one of his sons owned a car dealership in Keokuk. And he came in and he says, Dad, he said, you can't drive the car, but you have to choose one of the other Keokuk drivers. You have to have the same driver for every race. You're going to run a road course race, a track on an asphalt track, and a race on a dirt track. Who do you want? And my grandpa didn't even blink an eye. He said, I want my brother-in-law, Don White, which surprised my Uncle Mike, because Dick Hutcherson drove more like my grandpa, not Don White. So that kind of bothered my Uncle Mike for about a week, and he said, Dad, why did you say Don? And he said, Michael, Don White got more out of every single race car he ever drove than anybody I ever raced against. He would get every ounce out of that car. Whether it was a good car or a bad car that night, he was going to drive it to the fullest, and so that was the respect he had for Don. And the last person is Ramo Stott. Ramo's a fellow Mopar Hall of Fame member, inducted several years ago. He never beat Ernie for a championship in IMCA. But if you look at the IMCA record books, Ernie Derr and Ramo Stott finished first, second, almost every race for 5, 6, 7 years. So they competed against each other strongly. When Ramo left in the late 1960s to go run ARCA and USAC, he won 3 national championships. He also sat on the pole for the 1976 Daytona 500. Ernie loved racing on dirt. That's one of the reasons why he probably didn't move up as much in other series, but he loved that fact of being on the dirt. Also, the IMCA races, he could get home after most races. It might be a late night, but he had 6 kids that he had to help raise, so that was important to him. And last, I'd like to thank Ramo Stott for all of his help before my grandpa died of dementia in 2014. He helped my uncles organize the sale of his racing memorabilia and everything, and he was somebody that our family leaned on greatly to help us through that time. And the Stotts and Derrs, this is totally amazes me. 40 years ago, you would have never thought that Ramo and Judy and my grandmother, and however many kids are home, would meet every Thursday night for dinner at the Keokuk Yacht Club, I think it's tacos, and sit and tell stories. That wouldn't have happened 40 years ago because of the competition, but that shows the respect between the Derrs and the Stotts. To finish up, Ernie worked hard to be successful, and I learned from my grandpa how to work hard and to be humble. If Ernie was here right now, he'd say to me, Jeffrey, you've already spoken for 13, 14 minutes too long. Okay, he didn't like to talk about his accomplishments. He felt what he was doing was a job, and it was a way to support his family. Racing gave many people in my family the opportunity to get a college education or the career education they need to be successful in life. He was very proud of his wife, kids, and grandchildren. Ernie only had an 8th grade education, so he would not allow his kids to miss school to go watch him race. He told them that wasn't even an option. Don't ask me. He'd say, my dad deprived me of an education. I'm not doing that to you. So thanks again for this great honor for my grandfather, my hero, and my mentor, Ernie Derr.
If you like this video, please smash the like button. And if you want to see more videos like this one online, hit the subscribe to Mopar TV button. It's totally free. Also, if you'd like to support the Mopar Hall of Fame and vote for future inductees, go to MoparCollectorsGuide.com and subscribe to the only Mopar magazine that matters. A portion of your subscription will go to help keep Mopar history alive for future generations.